What's up, YouTubers? A couple days late making this video. I apologize. To tell you the truth, I just completely forgot about it. But anyway, this week what I want to talk about is the challenges now that I would face. And I kind of got into this last week about once I became an atheist. Some of the things that I noticed. So, once I declared myself an agnostic, while really being an atheist, one of the things I started to notice in high school was that I started to realize that I was in a super religious place. This is when I found out about what it really meant to live in the Bible Belt. Once people found out that I was an agnostic, because I really did not keep this secretive, and the way I would describe my belief, or better yet, lack of a belief, well, not trying to come out and say that I was an atheist, because remember that subconsciously I'm trying to hide this very fact. They would treat me differently, and they would ultimately wind up calling me an atheist in the inner way, calling me a heathen, the Antichrist, trying to convert me, trying to get me in trouble. And ultimately there was an incident where I did get into some trouble. Now, basically, what ended up happening was, I remember there was this one incident where one morning I went to school, and in the first period, this is where they do the moment of silence, and then, you know, before that though, you stand up and you recite the pledge to the flag. Well, we all know that the pledge to the flag, though it did not originally have these words in there, now have the words "under God." So instead of just leaving those words out, I decided that I was not going to recite the pledge at all, because ultimately, why is those words even in there? So ultimately, that pledge is not for me, now is it? It's not representing the country in its totality. So I decided that I would not stand and recite the pledge. Now, I had done this a couple times before, but this particular time, I guess the teacher decided that she had had enough. Well, they wound up, once I decided not to do, I did not disturb anyone. I never disturb anyone when I've done this in the past, and I didn't do it then. Well, she noticed what I had done, and once before they even started the pledge, she basically said that I needed to stand up and I needed to recite it. I decided that I was not going to do it. I told her that I was not going to do it, and I even went further to quickly explain to her why I wasn't going to do it. It had to be done quickly because remember that the rest of the school was already starting the pledge, and shortly after the pledge is done, they start the moment of silence. I'm not trying to interfere with somebody else's right to do that, so you know it just had to be an expedited process of me trying to explain to her why I wouldn't do it. Well, nonetheless, she didn't want to hear it. She knew this because this had been explained to her in the past, but she didn't want to hear it. So I got rolled up for failure to basically stand up and recite the pledge. So he's saying that as deviant, insubordinate. So got rolled up, got sent to the principal's office, to the disciplinary principal. Now, I was not worried at all because I just knew that ultimately this was going to come out in my favor. There was no way that I was going to be disciplined. I had no prior disciplinary history with the school. There was just no way that they was going to see this in the favor of the teacher, because I did nothing wrong, and I was like, this is just a big misunderstanding. Everything is going to be fine. Well, when I get to the office, things change quite a bit. It was not okay. They decided that it was deviant, it was insubordinate, and that ultimately I had no right to not stand and recite the pledge, because the pledge is a patriotic thing, and we're going to be patriotic and religious in that school, and so my objections was not relevant. I was still supposed to ultimately stand up and recite the pledge. So they decided that they would in fact go ahead and suspend me from school. Well, that was not going to go down with me. So I called my sister, and they was basically trying to explain to my sister this situation. I just knew that my sister would ultimately take my side. She didn't. And so they wound up going on ahead and suspending me for 3 days. And my sister, when I got home, basically proceeded to put me on punishment. And I'm like, I done nothing wrong here. So when I went back to school, I made the decision that I would never recite the pledge to the flag again. They was upset about that. So they wanted to put me into in-school suspension. I stayed in in-school suspension for a little while, but then once they realized that I still wasn't going to submit, they finally decided to let me back into regular population as long as I did not disturb anyone else doing the pledge or doing the moment of silence. I hadn't been doing that in the first place, so what the heck. So, that was my first major test in high school of what was about to happen, an awakening that we was in the Bible Belt and things was not going to go your way. Well, after this, people started to figure out what my beliefs was. And ultimately, it seemed like this whole agnostic title really wasn't working out as I had planned. People would confront me about my beliefs. They would frown upon me when they see me reading anything concerning atheism. And they always assumed, even up to this day, people assume that I became an atheist because of these writings, because of these atheist books that I would start to read. But that's actually not the case. I actually did not discover atheism books, books written by atheists and free thinkers, until after I had already made that transition into atheism. Of course, I was declaring myself to be an agnostic, but subconsciously I knew that I was in fact an atheist. So it was after that fact of becoming an atheist that I would even start to read those books. So those books had nothing to do with me being an atheist. But in addition to that, the school made sure there was no books in the library concerning atheism, but they made sure that there was plenty of books in the library concerning Christianity and God. In fact, there was several copies of the Holy Bible in different versions in there. But it ultimately wound up being where they even had an incident where they tried to prevent me from bringing such books to school. And then basically when I threatened to sue them, not really having any avenue at this time to do so, they kind of got a little nervous and decided, well, as long as you're not reading it during class time and you're not trying to force other kids to read it, it's okay. Mind you, everybody else was definitely trying to convert me and force me to read various bits of the Bible, which I had already pretty much read anyway. But they got no discrimination. In fact, they got special treatment. Ultimately, the school became the location of a church after school. And it's just mad. It's just sickening of the things that I started to have to go through. Well, basically at the age of 18, this is right after I got out of high school. I believe this is my senior year. I became a political activist. But not just necessarily a political activist. It was more or less I became an equal rights activist for atheists. For everybody. Now, at this particular point, I'm considering myself to be an agnostic atheist. But not really accepting the fact of just taking off this agnostic term altogether, because ultimately it was counterproductive. But I started to encounter problems there being equal rights, and they did not like this fact at all. I would get confronted about it all the time. They would tell me that I was the Antichrist, I was a heathen, and then once again I became a target for the school. And ultimately they said, well, we have no objection to your views as long as you basically saying I gotta be quiet in school. I can't read about this stuff anymore. I gotta be quiet. And unfortunately, I had to do this because if I didn't, it would be major consequences at home, and I didn't have anywhere else to stay. So ultimately, I kind of had to quiet things down. Well, I did still wind up getting thrown out of my sister's house. Had to go stay with my oldest sister. My sister threw me out of her house because I was becoming real big in my equal rights and my atheist activist work. I was not playing around with that. And she saw us and got upset and finally decided, you got to leave my house. Can't have anyone that's not of God living in my house. For no other reason, just that reason alone. So I wound up staying with my older sister under the agreement that I would have to keep things quiet as long as I was in her house. And so basically after that, I very quickly, within a couple days, I believe, wound up shipping off to the Army to get away from it all. And I'm going to talk about the things and challenges that I face in the Army in my next video. But I kept my activist work going. I kept studying various religions. This did not stop just based upon what had happened in terms of my experience at home and in terms of my experience at high school. Now I want to go on into a little bit more details about my experience in high school, specifically focusing in on ceremonies, and then jump into things that happened with my family. We would have ceremonies. We would have graduation all the time. We would have to bow our head in prayer. We wasn't allowed to walk out anything of that matter, and that always disturbed me. And this is why now I am very passionate about kids, about children in schools having the right to excuse themselves, to walk out. And ultimately I am for getting these prayers completely stopped, which actually was supposed to have been done decades ago. This ruling had already came down decades ago that there was not supposed to be any open prayer in school. Unfortunately, there is still though. I know it is in the area that I am at. You know, you go to these graduation ceremonies in high school, they're there. You're not allowed to excuse yourself. The prayers are led most of the time by pastors, ministers, even a lot of times by the principals. I mean, it's just absurd. And I hated that. Now, back at home, I had problems too. I had not quite reached the age of 18. So for the most part, I was ultimately forced to go to church. Now, obviously, you know, you're not going to be very good at forcing a 14-year-old through 18-year-old to go to church. So there was a lot of days where I would not go. But, you know, sometimes you win the fight, sometimes you don't. You got to have a place to put your head. So there were several times where I would, in fact, have to go to church. But I think that's a learning experience. They never changed anything in the church. And I figure, I mean, you pay attention to what they're saying, and it's crazy stuff, and people eat it up. So I would go there and take notes and everything, and then I would basically counter it. I was like, okay, but what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Once I turned 18, even though I was still living with my sister for a short period of time after that, I did not continue to go to that church. I would study in other churches to learn about them, but not the Baptists and what's not. I was done with that foolishness. But so that was pretty much my experience at home. There was even incidences where I would go with my granddaddy's house, and I would be shunned, and they would yell at me and try to convert me, talking about, oh, it's all about Jesus, and they trying to do an exorcism and what's not. Basically trying to get the devil out of me and bring God in, because obviously if you don't believe in God, you have to believe in the devil. And it's just extremely stupid stuff. But nonetheless, these are the things that I had to face with my family, and these are some of the things that I continue to face with my family that we're going to discuss in a later video. But make sure you go ahead and tune in for next week's video. I'm going to be talking about things that I faced in the military. That's going to be quite an interesting video, so please make sure you watch that one. But other than that, that's going to conclude this video for this week. Peace.
You really Since I was little, it looked like fun.